So, you've heard that many businesses are now using server-side Google Tag Manager, but you have also heard something about Google Tag Gateway. Now, you're wondering which one to use. In this video, I will compare server-side Google Tag Manager against Google Tag Gateway, their pros and cons, and this should help you decide which one to choose. Before we continue, first I wanted to give you a quick disclaimer. When I talk about Google Tag Gateway in this video, I mean the configuration that could be done through the Google Tag Manager or Google Analytics interface. So in the web Google Tag Manager container, it could be configured by going to the admin of the container and then Google Tag Gateway, and then you would follow steps to enable it. In Google Analytics, that could be done by going to the admin section, then data streams, select your website data stream, then configure tag settings. And then once you go to admin, you will see Google Tag Gateway right there. And now let's compare Google Tag Gateway against server-side Google Tag Manager. I will start by explaining the most basic tracking setup that you might have, and it does not include any server-side Google Tag Manager or Google Tag Gateway. We basically just have a website, and on that website we have, let's say, Google Analytics installed or web Google Tag Manager. Those tracking codes then send the data directly to the vendors, for example, Google Analytics or Google Ads. And those requests will look something like this, where we have googleanalytics.com/collect and then something, or maybe another Google domain. But what's important is that these domains belong to Google. Even though this kind of setup is the easiest to configure, it's also easiest to get blocked by various browser extensions. So at some point, Google introduced Google Tag Gateway that could potentially mitigate this, at least to some extent. So if you enable Google Tag Gateway in your web Google Tag Manager or Google Analytics, then it would work like this. You would still have a tracking code installed on your website, and those tracking codes would send data to Google's products. However, the request URLs would use a different domain. Instead of using googleanalytics.com or something like that, they would use your own domain, which means that some browser extensions will not see this as a tracking URL, therefore they will not block it. But this is not bulletproof, because some requests, at least based on what I've noticed, some requests will still be sent to googleanalytics.com or some other Google-related domain. When I was investigating this, Google's response was that this kind of mechanism is needed for some sort of compliance. I did not get a lot of details, but it still does not deny the fact that some requests will be sent to your own custom domain, while others will still be using Google's domain. So that's kind of a limitation. And also another thing is that Google Tag Gateway, as the name implies, works only with Google products, such as Google Tag Manager, Google Analytics, and Google Ads. So even though you can definitely get some sort of improvement with Google Tag Gateway compared to the original or the basic client-side setup, it's still not unlocking its full potential. That's where you might want to consider server-side Google Tag Manager, because it would work like this. You have a website, and then from that website, you send data to your server-side Google Tag Manager container. Here, the requests are using your own subdomain, and you can even configure it to hide certain request parameters from the URL. For example, if you send a request to mysite.com/collect and then your tracking ID and then some other parameters, some browsers will look at those parameters. They will understand that this is related to tracking, and then those requests can still be blocked. While with a proper server-side Google Tag Manager setup, those requests will be unreadable. Therefore, they have a much higher chance of being sent to your server. And then from the server, you can send those events further to other vendors, not just Google's tools like Google Analytics, but also other vendors like Facebook, Snapchat, or whatever. In fact, if we take a look at Google Tag Gateway, what it basically does is that you already have some tracking code on your website, and with Google Tag Gateway, its behavior changes slightly. Instead of sending data directly to Google's domains, they are sending to your own domain, but you don't have any control over what kind of changes are done here. Basically, some sort of event is generated on a page, let's say page view, and then Google Tag Gateway just takes that event and sends further to Google. But before that, Google Tag Gateway will often use your own domain. While with server-side Google Tag Manager, you have a lot of control. When the data is sent to your server container, and those requests might look something like this, those requests are sent further to your vendors, but you also have an additional layer of control and you can do a lot more advanced stuff. For example, you might be getting data not only from your website, you might be getting data from your email marketing platform or your CRM or some other system. You can use this to catch more events, and also you can use those tools to enrich the data. For example, let's say that on your website, someone submits a form. So you get the email address with that event. Based on that email address, you could send a request from your server to CRM, get more data about the user, for example, first name, last name, and so on, and send an enriched conversion to Google Ads with more user data, which means that the attribution will be more accurate.
By the way, I release Google Analytics or Google Tag Manager tutorials every week. If you want consistent flow of fresh knowledge and to stay up to date, then subscribe to this channel. It will help us a lot.
And now let's take a look at the main differences and similarities between Google Tag Gateway and server-side Google Tag Manager. Google Tag Gateway will be using your own custom domain, and the same applies to the server-side Google Tag Manager. However, again, as I've noticed, some requests might still be sent to Google's domain, while with server-side Google Tag Manager, all your requests will be sent to your own domain, of course, if everything is configured properly. Then Google Tag Gateway does not hide the request parameters, which means that some browser extensions, even with your own custom domain, will still notice the tracking URLs and might block them. While with a proper server-side setup, you can hide those request parameters. They will still be visible in the server, but fewer browser extensions will interfere. So having this in mind, Google Tag Gateway is less effective against browser extensions. It will provide some sort of improvement, but it is not as effective as a proper server-side Google Tag Manager setup. But a benefit of Google Tag Gateway configuration from the interface is that it is pretty simple to configure. For example, if you're using Cloudflare, it will take you like a couple of minutes, while with server-side Google Tag Manager, it's more difficult to configure. If you're experienced, it might take minutes, but normally it will probably take you hours to have a solid setup. Google Tag Gateway works only with Google's products like Google Analytics or Google Ads, while server-side Google Tag Manager can be used with other platforms as well, such as Meta Conversions API, for example. When it comes to Google Tag Gateway, you don't have much control here. Basically, whatever is tracked by a Google Tag or Google Tag Manager in your container, that is sent through Google Tag Gateway. You don't have an additional layer of control on some server where you could, let's say, maybe remove personal information or enrich your data, while with server-side Google Tag Manager, you can do that. Your server becomes an additional layer of control where you can remove certain data, or you can enrich your events and include not only, let's say, email address, but also first name, last name, and so on. When it comes to costs, Google Tag Gateway might cost nothing, for example, with Cloudflare, or maybe if you're using some other content delivery network, they might charge you for some usage, but basically the costs are from low to none. While with server-side Google Tag Manager, you will need to pay for the server, and those prices can vary a lot. For some businesses, it might be enough to start hosting from $20. For other businesses, it might be hundreds of dollars. And then when it comes to maintenance, Google Tag Gateway is kind of set it and forget it. You don't have much control here, but that also means that you don't have to maintain anything right there. While with server-side Google Tag Manager, there will be some maintenance. For example, if you're hosting on Google Cloud Platform or maybe on some other server, you might need to keep updating those servers and looking after them, unless of course you're using a specialized server-side Google Tag Manager hosting provider. In that case, they will handle the server updates. But even without that, your server Google Tag Manager container will still have tags, triggers, variables, and you might need to keep them updated from time to time. By the way, did you know that I have a bunch of free ebooks on Google Tag Manager and Google Analytics? So if you want to better learn these topics, then click the link below the video, download those ebooks, and get started. So now you might be wondering which one to choose. Maybe I can help you decide that. So you should choose Google Tag Gateway if you use only Google's tools like Google Ads or Google Analytics. You don't want to spend money on hosting. You don't have enough technical skills and you don't want to maintain anything. And if it's enough for you to have some sort of improvement in your data quality. And I mean the number of tracked events or conversions. In their communication, Google said that they have seen an 11% uplift in their data quality, but based on my experience, the number is somewhat lower. But nevertheless, there is still some sort of improvement there. And knowing the fact that it can take you like several minutes to do this, it can definitely be worth your time. However, if this kind of improvement is not enough for you and you want to have more, then you could consider choosing server-side Google Tag Manager. And you should do that if you're using multiple vendors, for example, Facebook, Google. You're not against spending some money on the infrastructure, but in exchange, you expect that your data quality will be better. Also, if you run paid ads and you want to improve your return on investment or maybe lower the cost per acquisition, then sending richer data to those vendors can definitely help. Also, server-side tagging is more technical, so if you have enough technical skills, then you can consider it. And if you want to have more improvement, for example, an uplift of 15-20%, but again, I want to set the expectations right. Not every business gets that kind of uplift, even with server-side Google Tag Manager, but many of them do. So you can still try to give it a shot. And then if you want to have more control or flexibility, which means that you can enrich your events on the server and then send those richer conversions to Google Ads, for example, not only with the email address, but you could also include other user data. Of course, if you have consent for that. So with more control, you can also use a thing called data enrichment, which means that your conversions will contain more data that can help with ad attribution. And when it comes to data enrichment, you might also want to connect more systems. For example, if you got a purchase on your website, you tracked it, but you only have the transaction ID, transaction total, but no user information, then maybe you could send a request from your server to your e-commerce platform, get more data about that purchase, and then send that data together with a conversion. So if you're looking for a quick shortcut that requires minimum effort, then Google Tag Gateway is the option. But if you want to get a better uplift in your results and you're ready to spend more time and money, then server-side Google Tag Manager is the way to go. Now you should have a better understanding about server-side GTM and Google Tag Gateway. If you're serious about your tracking setup, then I would suggest using server-side Google Tag Manager. If you don't have enough technical skills or budget, then you can go with Google Tag Gateway. If you found this video useful, hit the like button. That will help me understand what videos do you like and what should I create in the future. Also, if you want to learn more about Google Tag Manager or Google Analytics, then subscribe to this channel. My name is Julius, this is Analytics Mania, and I'll see you in the next video.